I would say one of the more prominent ways that we know about Title IX is during anniversaries, when we see stories about pioneers, female athlete pioneers, and those that have worked really hard to make change. That's the type of coverage that we generally tend to see.
How would you say, or how would you describe how female coaches currently in college sports specifically are portrayed in the media right now, currently, or even if they are or not?
How female coaches are portrayed in the media?
Mm-hmm.
I personally haven't studied how coaches are portrayed in the media. I can say generally that there continues to be a double standard about how female coaches are evaluated in comparison to their male colleagues. There's less tolerance for confident, assertive, or even aggressive communication styles. There are expectations about how those coaches need to look and act. There's still lingering homophobia in sports media that creates challenges for female coaches that do identify as lesbian, bi, queer in some way, not feeling comfortable perhaps sharing their family, and you see that in like media guide bios, for example. It's women that are married to men, it's very common to see them with their husbands, their children, kind of this vision of heteronormative ideal. But women that do not fit that standard, you tend to not see their personal lives. So I think that is like one challenge that women coaches continue to face, is that kind of lingering homophobia in terms of how their personal lives are policed, to the extent that they can share it with the broader public.
We had a lot of conversations with we've had conversations with the female coaches at UT. A lot of them mention this idea of a post-gender society. Would you say that we are currently in a post-gender society?
I would say unequivocally that we are not in a post-gender society. I think that is part of the problem with coverage of Title IX, is that it offers that view. It suggests that we are. And so while it feels so good during anniversaries of Title IX to read about women that faced just humiliating instances of sexism that we would never tolerate today, and to juxtapose that to today's climate, we feel really good about that progress, and it does make us feel like, hey, we've made it. But there are so many instances of lingering sexism and racialized sexism that leave you can't look at that and say we live in a post-gender society. I can't even imagine, honestly, what that would look like, how we would even get there where we are right now. There's just still too many instances of double standards, instances of both outright sexism and different forms of intersecting sexisms that continue to make life challenging for girls and women in sports.
What would you say that I'm gonna ask you first, what are the pros of Title IX, but I will follow up with what do you think the cons are. Okay. Do you think that Title IX has pushed women into sports, or what are the pros?
Yeah, there are so many positive outcomes as a result of Title IX. Before Title IX was enacted, fewer than 300,000 girls in the United States played high school sports. 30 years later, more than 3 million did. So just judging by that alone, you can see how many more girls had the opportunity to experience sports. And I think that's really significant. Mind you, the greatest growth, again, is still white, middle, and upper class women. But those numbers are still, I think, indicative of what Title IX was able to do in terms of starting to shift the landscape. There's a lot of positive outcomes to playing sports. They're not all positive, but there are a lot of positive outcomes. Girls that play sports are less likely to be sexually assaulted. Girls that play sports report higher levels of self-esteem and body confidence. Girls that play sports achieve, on average, 1 year, uh, one additional year of higher education compared with girls that do not play sports. And this is traced a lot back to the idea of valuing your body for its physical abilities and valuing yourself. And sports in many ways can instill confidence if structured in positive ways. So you just can't put a value on what that means. I think another kind of secondary outcome to Title IX is seeing girls and women in an athletic context helps us as kind of members of this community, members of society, to reimagine what the female body is capable of, what it can achieve, and what it means and how it's valued. So Title IX, although all it really did is provide opportunity, it facilitated cultural shift in how we value women, which I think is really significant. We have to think of women as strong in order to imagine women as leaders, for example. And I think seeing women as strong in a sporting context is part of that. That to me would be, and I'm talking only in the sports context because that's my area, of course, and I don't have the figures directly at my fingertips, but Title IX was never about sports. It was about addressing inequities in STEM fields. What happened was Republican Congress people saw that this could actually mean that money might be taken away from football and given to women, and we don't like that, and they made it about sports. Sports became kind of the first battleground site. They didn't care that girls and women might take math classes. They cared that they know there's a finite amount of money in athletic department, and they wanted all to go to football. So it's the opportunities in education, again, are just invaluable. So Title IX is, in many ways, just one of the most significant pieces of civil rights legislation of our lifetime.
And what are the cons?
So it's as a piece of what is essentially liberal feminist legislation, which is the idea that liberal feminism is generally the idea that women can achieve what they want as long as we just provide them the opportunity to do so. Liberal feminism does not really take into account you want me to start over?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry. Sorry about that.
Okay, we'll start with what are the cons.
Okay, that's good. That's okay. Well, we'll figure it out. Okay.
So Title IX is a piece of liberal feminist legislation. Liberal feminism generally is grounded in the idea that if you remove structural barriers facing girls and women, you are then giving them the opportunity to achieve some kind of social mobility. So it's all about removing kind of those structural impediments, and there's not really an acknowledgement of some of the more invisible, ingrained types of sexism that uphold patriarchy. So because of that, you can give women the opportunity to play sports. That doesn't mean that it will be accepted. And so I think one of the cons of Title IX is just the backlash on women who have the audacity to enter sporting spaces and play sports. There has been a significant amount of backlash and continues in some cases, despite, we have like a Megan Rapinoe on the women's national soccer team who's so celebrated and so loved by Americans. But you still have athletes like Serena Williams who continue to face backlash when they step out of what is accepted for women. And again, that's another example of a type of racialized sexism that we have to acknowledge with Title IX. One of the biggest cons of Title IX, I think, is the unintended consequence that happened in coaching. So before Title IX was passed, women's sports were organized under what was called the AIAW. it was something like 90-something percentage of the coaches were women. Now in the NCAA, about 50% of coaches are women. And what happened was Title IX legitimized women's sports. Once it was legitimized and there was resources behind some of those sports, most notably women's basketball, men were attracted to those positions. They saw them as legitimate coaching positions, and it created fewer positions for women to coach those sports. So that is probably one of the most cited unintended consequences of Title IX, a con, if you will.
Last question. As a previous athlete, would you say that Title IX helped you in any way or prevented you from doing anything while you were playing as an athlete in college?
Did Title IX help me as a former athlete? Absolutely. I had the opportunity to play high school basketball, high school soccer, and of course college basketball. When I played in college, I was a student athlete at Cal State Fullerton. We were part of the Big West Conference. I got to travel all over the West Coast. I mean, we had members in our conference we had New Mexico State, we had University of Nevada, we had Pacific University, UC Santa Barbara. I mean, I traveled all around the West Coast. I mean, what an opportunity. We had the funding to do that, and that is a direct result of Title IX. My sporting experience, while imperfect, still something that I am really proud of and look back on. I think I learned a lot from both the successes and the imperfections of it. I think with reflection really did allow me to grow. So I think you have to be thankful for Title IX. One of the problems that we're facing right now is a lack of consciousness and a lack of awareness of Title IX. The problem, though, is celebrating that lack of consciousness. And at the 40th anniversary of Title IX, that's what we saw. We saw lawmakers saying, the fact that girls and women don't know what Title IX is a great thing. It means we've made it. No, it means that the feminism that made Title IX possible is at risk of being undone. And so as we near the 50th anniversary, I think we have to advocate for awareness. We have to know what we've accomplished and all the work that still remains to be done.
Any final thoughts or anything you want to leave with?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on Title IX. And we've talked entirely about women's sports. I think the next big point of Title IX that sports journalists are going to have to confront is the Title IX lawsuits being filed against universities alleging a hostile climate facilitated by athletic departments that are out of control. And it happened at the University of Tennessee, it happened at Baylor, it's happened at a number of other universities, and it has typically been something that sports reporters are saying, that's not for us to cover. Now, I think this is significant because it's still a sports issue. Why are male athletes at big-time universities more likely to commit sexual misconduct compared with non-athletes? It's in part a function of just the culture of big-time athletics. And I think this will be kind of the next bastion of Title IX, protecting women and enabling women to access education. Of course, this has long been a part of what Title IX covers, but the focus hasn't necessarily been in sports, and that intersection, I think, is manifesting itself a little bit more now, and I think there is going to be an opportunity for sports journalists to draw some connections that will contribute to kind of how we understand both the possibilities and limits of sport, big-time college sports. All right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.